The U.S. Forest Service had always intrigued me. Growing up, I'd hear stories about rangers, how they protected the land, how they knew every trail, every tree, every hidden danger lurking in the woods. When I was offered a position as a rookie forest ranger, I thought it was a dream job. I would be doing something meaningful, something important. I could escape the city life and find peace in nature. What I didn't know was that I was walking straight into a nightmare. I was assigned to a station deep in the Cascade Mountains, a remote location known for its thick fog, ancient trees, and, according to the older rangers, things that should never be disturbed. From the moment I arrived, I sensed something was off. The other rangers seemed guarded, their conversations clipped. They would exchange knowing glances when certain topics came up, as if there was some unspoken rule they all adhered to. It wasn't until I started to ask too many questions that I began to understand just how deeply ingrained these rules were and how dangerous it could be to break them. Carl, my mentor, was one of the oldest rangers at the station. His wrinkled face looked like it had been carved from stone, and his eyes carried a weight that no one could ignore. He had a deep voice that seemed to carry a permanent layer of suspicion. "Don't go near the hollow," he warned me one evening after I'd finished my duty for the day. And don't ask why. At first, I thought he was just being overprotective. After all, I was a rookie, and it was common for experienced rangers to warn newcomers about the dangers of the woods. But Carl's tone wasn't casual. It was urgent. "The hollow," he continued, "is a place where things change. People disappear there. Animals go in, but they don't come out right. It's not just dangerous, it's cursed. There's a reason why some areas are restricted. We follow the rules for a reason. Break them, and you're inviting the darkness in." I tried to brush it off as superstition, but there was something in his eyes that made me think twice. He wasn't joking, and as I would soon learn, he wasn't exaggerating. The first rule of the U.S. Forest Rangers was simple. Never follow the sound of a distressed animal. At first, this seemed like an easy enough rule to follow. After all, how could anyone ignore the desperate cries of a creature in pain? But that's exactly the point. The Rangers knew something that civilians didn't. Those cries were not always what they seemed. It was a cold autumn evening when I first encountered it. I had been out on a routine patrol, walking along a trail deep in the woods, when I heard it, a faint, heart-wrenching cry echoing through the trees. At first, I thought it might be a deer caught in a trap, or perhaps a bird with a broken wing. The sound was so raw, so desperate, it tugged at something deep inside me. My heart raced. I stepped off the trail, drawn to the sound, my feet crunching in the fallen leaves. The deeper I ventured, the louder the cries grew, but something felt wrong. The forest around me was unnaturally silent. The wind had stopped. There were no other animals, no insects, no birds, just the sound of that creature in pain. When I finally reached the source, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing in the middle of the clearing, was a fox, its fur matted and torn. It was staring at me with wide, panicked eyes, its mouth opening and closing in a sound that didn't seem to come from its throat. It was as if the cry was being manipulated, pulled from it by some unseen force. Before I could take another step, the air grew cold. My breath came out in frosty clouds, and the ground beneath me seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. The fox turned and bolted into the woods, disappearing into fog. But the moment it left, a chilling realization gripped me. The sound wasn't natural. It wasn't the cry of an animal. It was a lure, and I had almost walked right into the trap. The second rule was one that Carl had warned me about in passing. Never visit the forgotten trails. These were the trails that had been marked on old maps but were no longer in use. According to Carl, the Forest Service had deliberately stopped maintaining them decades ago for reasons no one cared to explain. But the rule went deeper than just avoiding old paths. No one was ever to speak of them. No one was to venture into those areas. And no one ever came back when they did. I should have listened, but curiosity and a sense of duty pushed me to investigate. One afternoon, while out on patrol, I found an old trail marker half buried beneath the undergrowth. It was weathered. Its paint faded to the point where it was nearly impossible to read. But the words were clear. Trail 9. I knew about Trail 9. It was one of the forgotten paths. And yet, something compelled me to follow it, against my better judgment. I stepped onto the trail, the crunch of dry leaves beneath my boots, the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. The deeper I went, the stranger things became. The trees seemed to close in, their branches twisting and curling into unnatural shapes. The air grew thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. My flashlight flickered, casting strange, shifting shadows on the ground. Then I heard it, the soft scrape of footsteps behind me, too faint to be an animal. But when I turned, there was no one there, just trees. I kept walking, hoping it was my mind playing tricks. But with every step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. And then I saw it, an old, decaying cabin hidden just off the trail. It was the kind of place you see in horror movies. Rotted wood, broken windows, the stench of mildew hanging heavy in the air. But something was inside. I could feel it. Before I could move closer, a loud crash sounded from within. I froze. The door creaked open, and out stepped a figure. Its body hunched and twisted, eyes empty and dark. It was a man, but not anymore. It was something else, something beyond human. It whispered in a voice so cold, so hollow, it made my skin crawl. Leave before it's too late. I turned and ran faster than I ever thought possible. When I looked back, the cabin was gone. The trail was gone. It was as if the forest had swallowed it whole.